Hey everyone, how are you doing? I'm going to talk about this book today, Order Out of Chaos by Scott Walker. I've known Scott Walker for a long time. He's my coach, and I've used him as a coach for about 3 years now. He's an ex hostage for ransom negotiator, and this is about negotiation, basically high stakes negotiation. Now, if you think about hostage for ransom, they're probably the most highest stakes negotiation ever. In this world, they're often negotiating for people's lives, often with large sums of money, and with difficult, very, very difficult people, people we probably don't like. And Scott has a great way of describing these people. He calls them worthy opponents, and I really like that term. It's a really, really sort of empowering term that he uses. And anyway, back to the negotiation. I think it's like a transferable skill that you can apply to any area of life, and Scott goes through it in here. So, even personal areas. So, let's say you're married, you've got a significant other, there may be some negotiation there. Or it could be a difficult family member, or even kids if you've got kids. And he goes through that, in how to negotiate. And a lot of it's all because, as he says here, win every negotiation, thrive in adversity, become a world-class communicator. And if I think, even before I read this book, the two things that I've learned most from Scott, number one, is he taught me a lot about productivity and techniques, which is great. But number two, how to actually negotiate in business meetings. I'm a consultant. I'm not naturally a salesperson, but obviously we're all selling in a way, and that includes influencing people. And I've been in many situations where I've even had people shout at me in meetings, and you've got to kind of understand them and empathize with them, and almost, as the book goes into, the way to do this is to do more listening. It's called active listening, and there's many techniques in here before you can start to influence them. Anyway, I'm just going to pick out a few areas. So the first area that I like about this book is it's not actually directly relevant to negotiating, but because it's a psychology book, really, Scott goes into this kind of high level psychology here. So we've got this 4-character method of the brain, which is a really good sort of general summary of how the brain works. Just before it, they're talking about right brain and left brain thinking. So you think about it like the left brain and the right brain, they're always associated with different things. So the left brain we think is more analytical, the right brain is more emotional. On the 4 characters method, you've got an analytical and an emotional side to each of the sides of the brain. So character 1 at the top on the left brain is more the rational thought of the left brain, and the character 2 in the left brain is emotional. And then on the right brain, character 3, which is at the bottom, on the right brain is emotional, and character 4 is the almost like the rational side of what we would classically think is the emotional side of the brain. I don't want to go too much into this, but it is an absolutely fabulously interesting model. Like essentially the character 1 is definitely your logic. This is where you do your sort of maths equations, if you like, on the left side of the brain. So that is true to what we think the left side of the brain is. But the emotional side to the left brain is more about stored memories, and this is where like trauma is stored and things like that. So in a way it is kind of rational because it represents things that actually happen, but that's stored in the character 2. The most interesting character, I think, is character 4. So hang on, I'll just go over character 3. Shiny object syndrome, it says here. I've highlighted it, and that's because that's the area that is about adventure. This is where you're really going to get taken off. So that is classic emotional behaviour. Character 4 is a really interesting. This is the upper part, the rational part of the right brain. So the right brain we associate with emotional, but this is the rational part. And this is the one where you are, it's almost like mindfulness, or like gratitude, acceptance, that kind of thing. So it's a really, really powerful part of the brain. Anyway, let's move on to the negotiation. So first, we've got the 5 levels of listening. Level 1, listening for gist, which is basically just listening off until you switch off. Level 2, listening to rebuke. So this is where you're just listening to someone, but you're really just waiting to get your say and prove them while they're wrong and you're right. Listening 3 is listening for logic. So this is where you're listening for the basic logic, but it's only until you get to levels 4 and 5 that you actually become almost like a world-class communicator. So level 4 is listening for emotion, and this is where you're really, really trying to understand the kind of emotions, even if they don't make sense to you, just trying to understand, you know, what their argument is and where that emotion's coming from. And level 5, which is listening for point of view, is at the top of the levels of listening, and this is where you're really using things like empathy to understand where that person is coming from. I've underlined here empathetic curiosity, to see things from their perspective. Okay, and the next section is on active listening. And active listening, there are so many different types of it, but just understanding these, so things like Scott's got a term here called MOPIs. It's actually an acronym for all the different parts of it. So we've got things like minimal encouragers, just what you're trying to do is just keep the person talking. Open questions, so you want to avoid closed questions because you just end up at a dead end. Reflecting and mirroring, we might have all have heard of that. So yeah, reflecting and mirroring, which is also relaying back to the person what the type of what you've actually heard, which is also similar to, if I just skip forward, we've got paraphrasing and summarizing, which is similar, paraphrasing and summarizing, but there's also emotional labeling, which is really good because it's like calling out what you think you see. It almost, with a lot of these techniques, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. With active listening, you're almost like defusing the situation because you're just laying down on the table what you think. So you're calling out what you think. Here you've got these certain terms like it looks like, it sounds like, it seems like, and you might be saying it seems like you're getting annoyed because of X, Y, and Z. You're just laying it down on the table, and then what's really good after that is just to do a pause, just wait, and that's in the active listening. Effective pauses. Sometimes once you've laid something down, just wait and let them speak. And then lastly, I want to talk about empathy and compassion, which is, when I read this in the book, it kind of changed what I understood empathy and compassion to be. And there is a difference, because I think a lot of people confuse empathy with compassion. People think empathy is actually feeling sorry for someone or something like that. It's not. Empathy is actually, as Scott calls it, it's a doing word. So empathy is to understand someone's viewpoint or worldview. You don't have to like that person, you don't even have to agree with what they're saying. It's just to communicate back that you really understand their own viewpoint without having almost like no dog in the fight. You've not got any emotion towards it or any personal view, and quite often that's better. Compassion, of course, this is what you've got a personal view in their viewpoint, and that's where they're distinguished. So another area of the book that I found really interesting was this 5 stages of communication diagram here, which is really interesting. So you start with active listening, which then demonstrates empathy with the person, which then builds rapport. After that, it then increases your chance of influence, and then finally it encourages a behavioural change. So just understanding those steps there, which is really good. So yeah, great book, Order Out of Chaos. There are other books like this. I've read Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference, another great book on negotiation. Chris had a similar background to Scott. This one's just came out this year. It's a great book, go and give it a go. Anyway, hope you enjoy that video. See you all next time.